looked good I got in the mail, thought it was mine. But you know, we have to take ideas from each other, and that's how we work. So take risks, but try to be sure they're reasonable, and I've been very blessed not to be hurt by mine.
I have a question for Mr. David, and I'm glad that your organization had been engaged in G8 process, which is aid as well as the waiving of the foreign debt for developing countries. What is bread for the world's position for a controversial issue between developing and developed countries, which is about the subsidies which are being debated in World Trade Organization in Agreement on Agriculture? Because in developed countries, it seems that it is a very political issue and it is very hard to tackle with. Once I reached here, then I realized that. But in the developing countries, it's again a political issue, and most of the developing countries, they argue and they blame that developed countries' subsidies are getting an imbalance in international trade, which is a barrier for developing countries to get market access for their agriculture products, which ultimately brings hunger and poverty among the farmers in developing countries, one. And two, there is a import surge or dumping of agriculture products in developing countries by rich countries. So how are you engaged in this process, or what is your say on that? Thanks.
We have worked on broad reform of agricultural policies, food and farm policies, because our food and farm policies affect hungry people in this country, they affect hungry people around the world. What's most striking to me is that as we're setting our farm policies, we don't think much of the impact around the world. So I think, in my judgment, for several decades, our subsidy policies led to low-cost food, which depressed markets, and also our protectionism kept agricultural products from developing countries out of our market, out of the European markets. And then, I think it was in 2008, we adopted the biofuels, deeper subsidies and protectionism for biofuels, which I know have benefited a lot of people in Iowa. But it worked together with other things that were going on in the world. Nobody planned it that way, but it did work to drive up the prices of basic grains in a dramatic way in 2008. And one impact of that was another 200 million people were driven into hunger. 200 million people. Because in developing countries, poor people typically eat, maybe they spend 70% of their income on rice or corn or wheat. So when all those prices went up 100% in a year, the short-term impact was that people didn't eat as much. Now the longer-term impact may be that there are new production opportunities for farmers in poor countries. But this, you know, when we made those decisions, we should have been, it seems to me, we should be thinking about the global impact as well as our domestic impact. And more generally, our food and farm policies are heavily influenced by organized special interests. Heavily, more than many other sectors of society. So I'm struck that our current farm policies don't do very much for rural people in rural Iowa who don't have a big spread of corn or soybeans. They aren't helped much by the Farm Bill. So in rural Iowa, elderly people, people who work at Walmart, people who have industrial, you know, the poorest people, there's a higher rate of poverty in rural America than urban America, but the people who are poor don't get checks. In county after county, the people who get the farm checks tend to be the big landowners in the county. So, you know, and just in other ways, we have a quarter of the kids in the country live in households that run out of food. We've got an epidemic of obesity. So, you know, a lot of people are 10 pounds overweight. Many other people are 50 pounds overweight. And it's a growing epidemic of obesity all around the world. Our agriculture does some environmental damage. So it just seems to me that the food aid thing is a very clear case, where basically it's for half a dozen shipping companies that we are taxing taxpayers' money that could be used instead to help hungry people. So since you're from Iowa, and Iowa State above all, you know, you got to help us fix this. I don't have a simple answer to the problem, but our food and farm policies are so driven by special interests that they do not serve, in many respects, they're not ideal from a public interest point of view.
Well, let's thank and congratulate.
You're going to thank me anyway, huh?
Yeah.